Elena moved quickly between the tables, balancing a tray in her hands as the sound of chatter, clinking glasses, and soft jazz filled the restaurant. It was another long evening, the kind she had grown used to. The restaurant was busy, like it usually was on Fridays, and she barely had a moment to breathe. Her hair was tied neatly back, her uniform pressed, and though she felt the ache in her feet, her face carried a gentle smile. To the guests, she was just another server, polite and efficient. But behind that smile, Elena carried stories of a life that few around her knew. She had come to the city with hope, but little else. Her first days were hard, filled with doubts and small battles to survive. Rent was high, work was endless, and money was always short. Yet she kept moving forward. Every tip mattered, every extra shift helped. She sent money back home when she could, though it meant cutting back on her own needs. For Elena, family came before comfort. That was the way she had been raised, and that was the way she chose to live. The restaurant wasn't glamorous, but it was her steady ground. She had learned to balance trays with ease, to handle rude customers with patience, and to find small joys in simple moments. Like when a child smiled at her after she brought them dessert, or when a couple thanked her warmly for good service. These moments reminded her that her work, though hard, still mattered. She often told herself that dignity wasn't about the job title, but the heart you carried while doing it. Her co-workers liked her, though she was quieter than most. During breaks, while others scrolled through their phones or joked loudly, Elena often sat with a notebook in hand, writing down words and practicing sentences in English or French. Language was her secret passion. Words were her escape, her bridge to something bigger. Sometimes, she even whispered translations to herself while clearing tables, turning a guest's casual comment into 3 different languages in her head. It made the long hours feel less heavy. No one at work really knew how deeply she longed for something different. She rarely spoke about her dreams, afraid they might sound foolish. But deep inside, she carried a vision. One day she hoped to be more than a server. Maybe she could work in business or become a translator or even travel for work. She imagined herself in airports and conference rooms, in places where her words connected people. For now, though, those dreams stayed tucked in her heart while her hands carried trays and menus. Her life outside the restaurant was simple. A small apartment, barely enough for one person, with creaking pipes and thin walls. On nights after late shifts, she would make tea and sit by the window, staring out at the city lights. She often thought of her family back home, her younger brother still in school, her mother who worried too much, her father who had taught her the value of hard work. Their voices stayed with her, reminding her why she endured long shifts and tired mornings. Every sacrifice, every dollar saved was a step toward a better future. Still, there were moments when loneliness crept in. The city was big, and though it buzzed with life, it sometimes felt cold. Elena didn't have time for many friends. Her schedule kept her busy, and by the time she had a day off, she often chose to rest rather than socialize. But she didn't let sadness linger too long. Instead, she filled her evenings with books, language practice, and quiet determination. She told herself that life was not about where you started, but where you chose to go. That Friday evening began like many others. The rush of dinner service left her moving quickly from table to table, carrying drinks, jotting down orders, and keeping her voice calm even when customers grew impatient. She had learned to read people quickly, who wanted to chat, who wanted to be left alone, who was kind, who was dismissive. It didn't bother her anymore. She reminded herself that everyone carried their own struggles, even those who seemed demanding. Patience, she had learned, was more powerful than pride. As the hours passed, her feet throbbed, but she kept her posture straight. She noticed a group of well-dressed men being seated at one of the larger tables near the corner. They looked important, the kind of people used to find things and polite service. Elena didn't think much of it at first. She had served many such customers before. Some were polite, some barely looked at her, some left big tips, some left nothing at all. She approached them with the same calm energy she gave to everyone. "Good evening," she said softly, placing menus before them with practiced ease. "Can I get you something to drink while you look over the menu?" One of the men, slightly older with a composed presence, glanced at her and nodded. He didn't seem unfriendly, just quiet and observant. Elena didn't linger. She took their drink orders, brought the wine they requested, and stepped back to allow them their space. To her, they were just another table in a long night of service. But she didn't know that this ordinary moment was the beginning of something that would change her life. She didn't know that her quiet strength, her hidden skill, and her simple choice of words on a phone call later that night would set her on a path she never imagined. For now she simply carried on with her work, unaware that fate had already begun to move its pieces. The night stretched on, filled with the usual rhythm, orders, plates, refills, and polite smiles. Yet in the quiet corners of her mind, Elena continued to dream. She imagined herself beyond the restaurant, beyond the tired steps of her routine. She didn't know how or when things might change, but she carried hope like a flame that never went out. And that hope, though small and steady, was about to lead her into a story far greater than she ever thought possible. The restaurant was alive with voices, the hum of conversations mixing with the soft notes of background music. Elena moved with steady steps, carrying dishes to one table and drinks to another. It was the kind of evening where she had little time to pause. Every second mattered. She tried not to think about how tired her legs felt or how the hours seemed to stretch. Instead, she focused on her work, reminding herself that each shift brought her closer to her goals. The men at the corner table had been enjoying their evening, talking in low but serious tones. They weren't rowdy or demanding, but there was an air about them that suggested importance. Their suits were tailored, their watches gleamed under the warm restaurant lights, and their words carried the weight of people used to being listened to. Elena noticed, but she did not let it distract her. She had served people of all kinds, and she treated everyone with the same careful respect. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, just as she was about to return to their table with a bottle of wine. For a moment she hesitated. Phones were not meant to be used during shifts, but the screen flashed with her brother's name. Her heart sank. He rarely called during her work hours unless something was wrong. She quickly excused herself to the side, turned slightly away from the dining room, and answered in a low voice. The moment she spoke, her tone shifted. She wasn't speaking English anymore. Her words flowed in smooth, natural Russian, her voice calm but firm as she listened to her brother's worried tone. He had run into trouble with a school assignment, panicking about grades and exams. Elena's voice softened as she reassured him, gently guiding him through what he needed to do. She reminded him that he was capable, that he only needed to stay calm and focus. Her words carried warmth, the kind of comfort only an older sister could give. She spoke quickly, aware of the ticking minutes, aware of the busy restaurant waiting for her return. Still, she didn't rush her brother off the phone until she knew he was calmer. Her Russian was fluent, rich with expression, filled with emotion that her co-workers rarely heard. To Elena, it was simply the language of home, the sound of her childhood, the bridge between her and her family far away. When she hung up, she slipped the phone back into her pocket, took a breath, and returned to her duties as if nothing had happened. But she did not notice the eyes that had followed her during that call. At the corner table, the older man with the composed presence had paused in mid-conversation, listening carefully. His gaze had lingered on her as she spoke, his expression thoughtful, almost surprised. He had heard the confidence in her tone, the ease with which she handled herself in 2 languages. Something about her voice had caught his attention. Elena returned with the wine, pouring carefully for each guest, her expression calm and professional. She did not know that the man was still watching her, curious. She did not know that her simple act of answering a call would make her stand out in his mind. To her, it was just another moment in a long shift, a quick reminder of the responsibilities she carried outside of work. Later in the evening, as she cleared empty plates from their table, the man asked her a simple question. His voice was polite, not demanding. "That language you were speaking earlier, was it Russian?" Elena blinked, slightly startled, then gave a small nod. "Yes, my family speaks Russian," she said softly, careful not to draw too much attention. She wasn't sure how he had noticed, but she offered the truth plainly. The man gave a small smile, not unkind. "You speak it well. Do you know other languages too?" Her cheeks warmed slightly. Few people asked her such things. Most customers wanted fast service, not conversation. Still, she answered honestly, "I speak Russian and English. I've been studying French too." His eyebrows lifted slightly, impressed. "That's quite a skill," he said, his tone thoughtful. But then he let the subject drop, as though he didn't want to press too much in the middle of her work. Elena thanked him quietly and returned to her tasks. but her mind lingered on the brief exchange. It was rare for someone to notice that side of her. She often kept her abilities hidden, unsure if they mattered in her current life. To hear someone acknowledge them, even with just a few words, felt like a small spark in her chest. The rest of the night passed as usual. She cleared tables, brought desserts, refilled drinks, and exchanged polite words with customers. By the time the group at the corner table prepared to leave, Elena had nearly forgotten the moment. She only remembered again when the older man placed his card on the table along with the payment. He didn't say much, only offered her a nod and a calm smile. She picked up the card later when cleaning the table, glancing at the embossed letters and the elegant design. It wasn't just any card. It belonged to someone important, though she didn't know exactly who. She slipped it into her pocket, unsure what to think. People often left business cards at restaurants, sometimes out of habit, sometimes out of politeness. She assumed it was nothing more. Still, there was something about the man's measured gaze and thoughtful tone that stayed with her, long after the restaurant lights dimmed and the doors were locked for the night. Walking home in the cool air, Elena thought about the day. Her brother was calmer. The shift had been long but manageable, and she had earned a little extra in tips. But her thoughts returned again and again to the man's question. "Do you know other languages too?" It reminded her of the dreams she kept hidden, the ambitions she rarely spoke of. For a moment, as she walked under the streetlights, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where her words, her skills, truly mattered. She shook the thought away with a small smile. Dreams were for later. For now, she needed rest. Tomorrow would bring another shift, another day of work, another chance to keep moving forward. She had no idea that tomorrow would bring something far more unexpected, something that would pull her from the rhythm of her ordinary days and into a world she had only ever imagined in quiet moments by her window. The next morning, Elena woke up to the sound of her alarm clock buzzing. The sunlight slipped in through the thin curtains of her small apartment, painting the room in a soft glow. She rubbed her eyes, still tired from the long shift the night before. The first thing she thought of was her family. She reached for her phone and checked for any messages. There was one from her brother, thanking her for calming him down the night before. His words made her smile. Even though she was far away, she still felt connected to him. That connection gave her strength. She went about her usual routine, making a simple breakfast and preparing for another day at the restaurant. Life rarely changed for her. Each day followed the same pattern: work, home, study, sleep. She had learned to find comfort in the rhythm, even when it was tiring. Yet something about last night kept floating back into her mind. The man at the corner table. His calm eyes, the way he had asked about her languages, and the business card he had left behind. She had tucked the card away without much thought, but now it seemed to call to her. She pulled it out from her bag and studied it in the morning light. The card was heavy, well made, with an embossed name that sounded familiar, though she couldn't place it. Underneath the name was a company, one she had heard mentioned before in the news. She felt a small wave of surprise. This was not just any diner who had left her a card. Whoever he was, he carried influence, power, and wealth. Still, Elena wasn't sure what to make of it. People like him lived in a different world, far away from her small apartment and long restaurant shifts. She doubted she would ever hear from him again. By the time she left for work, she had nearly convinced herself to forget it. She slipped the card back into her bag and focused on the day ahead. But fate had other plans. At the restaurant that afternoon, the manager called her aside before the dinner rush. His tone was unusual, both surprised and a little curious. "Elena, someone asked for you," he said, holding out a small envelope. "It was delivered here earlier. I think it's from one of last night's guests." Elena frowned in confusion and took the envelope. Inside was a neatly folded letter written on fine paper. The handwriting was clear, formal, and polite. The letter invited her to meet the man she had served the night before. He explained that he had been impressed by her language skills and wanted to discuss a possible opportunity. He asked if she would be willing to accompany him on a short trip the following day to act as a translator during an important meeting. The details were vague, but the letter carried a sincerity that surprised her. At the bottom was his signature, the same name from the card. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the words again and again. It felt unreal. Why would someone like him choose her? She was just a waitress. Surely there were professionals, people with degrees and experience far more qualified than she was. The thought of stepping into such a world filled her with both excitement and fear. When her shift began, she tried to keep her mind focused, but the letter kept pulling at her thoughts. Every time she carried a tray or took an order, she wondered what it would be like to say yes. Could this be the chance she had been quietly waiting for? Or was it too good to be true? That night, back in her apartment, she sat by the window with the letter in her hands. She read it again, this time slower, paying attention to every word. There was nothing pushy or unkind in his tone. He seemed respectful, almost careful, as if he didn't want to overwhelm her. That gave her comfort. Still, she hesitated. Trusting strangers was risky. But then again, wasn't every opportunity in life a risk? If she stayed where she was, nothing would change. If she stepped forward, maybe, just maybe, her life could take a different turn. She thought of her brother, of her parents, of the sacrifices they had all made. She thought of the languages she had studied late into the night, the dreams she had carried quietly for so long. Perhaps this was not chance at all. Perhaps it was the moment she had been preparing for without even knowing it. Finally, with a deep breath, she decided. She would go. She would at least see what this man wanted, hear what he had to say. If nothing came of it, she could return to her life as before. But if something did, she didn't dare let herself dream too far ahead. The next day, she dressed carefully, choosing her simplest but neatest clothes. She didn't own anything fancy, but she wanted to appear respectful and professional. Her heart raced as she made her way to the address written at the bottom of the letter. It was not far from the center of the city, a tall building with glass windows that reflected the sunlight. She felt small as she stood at the entrance, but she reminded herself to stay calm. Inside, she was guided to a quiet lounge where the man waited. He greeted her warmly, not with arrogance but with a calm dignity. He thanked her for coming and gestured for her to sit. For a moment, Elena's nerves melted. His manner was kind, not intimidating. He explained that his company was preparing for a meeting with Russian business partners. The meeting was important, but they needed someone trustworthy and skilled to help with communication. He had been searching for the right person, but had not found anyone he felt fully confident in. Then, by chance, he had overheard Elena speaking Russian at the restaurant. Her natural fluency and composure had caught his attention. "You reminded me," he said, "that real talent often hides in plain sight." Elena listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. This was the kind of chance she had only imagined in her private dreams. Yet here it was, offered to her by someone who seemed to see beyond her apron and tray. Still, she spoke honestly. "I am not a professional translator. I have never done this before. I only studied on my own." The man nodded as though he had expected her hesitation. Sometimes skill comes not from a title but from practice and heart. "I believe you can do this. All I ask is that you come with me tomorrow. You will not be alone. We will guide you." His words settled something inside her. He was not asking her to be perfect, only to try. That thought gave her courage. By the end of their conversation, Elena agreed. She would accompany him the next day. He gave her the details and assured her that everything would be taken care of. She thanked him quietly, still overwhelmed by how quickly her life seemed to be changing. When she left the building, the city looked different. The streets, the cars, the people, all of it seemed brighter, more alive. For the first time in years, she felt that her hidden efforts, her late-night studies, her sacrifices, might finally matter. She walked home with her heart racing, not from fear but from hope. That night she lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. Questions swirled in her mind. What if she failed? What if she made mistakes? But another voice inside her whispered louder. What if this is the beginning? What if this is the door you've been waiting to open? She clung to that thought as she finally drifted into sleep. The next day, she would step into a world she had only seen from afar. She did not know what awaited her, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life was about to change in ways she could not yet imagine. The morning came sooner than Elena expected. She woke before the alarm rang, her thoughts too restless to let her sleep. For a long time she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her heart racing with both fear and excitement. This was not like any day she had ever lived before. She was not going to the restaurant. She was not putting on her uniform or tying her hair back for a long shift. Today she was stepping into something unknown. She dressed carefully, choosing her neatest clothes again, though they were still simple compared to what she imagined other people might wear in the circles she was about to enter. She brushed her hair until it was smooth, applied a little makeup to look fresh, and checked her reflection in the mirror several times. She wanted to look calm, even though her hands trembled slightly. When she arrived at the location she had been given, her eyes widened. Parked outside was a sleek car shining under the sunlight. A driver stood waiting, and when she gave her name, he opened the door politely for her. Elena's heart skipped. She had never been inside such a car before. The seats were soft leather, the air inside cool and scented faintly of something elegant. She sat carefully, unsure where to place her hands, and the car began to move smoothly through the streets. Her thoughts raced as she looked out the window. Part of her still wondered if this was all real. Just a few days ago, she was carrying trays in the restaurant, and now she was being driven in a luxury car. She whispered to herself, reminding her nerves to stay steady. She had agreed to this, and she would see it through. The car arrived at a private airport, a place Elena had never seen before. Beyond the gate stood several sleek aircraft, their polished bodies gleaming in the sun. The sight made her breath catch. She had flown before, but only in crowded economy seats on commercial flights. The planes here looked nothing like that. They were quiet, elegant, and clearly belonged to another world. As she stepped out of the car, she spotted the man she had met at the building the day before. He greeted her warmly, thanking her again for agreeing to come. His manner put her at ease, even as everything around her felt overwhelming. He introduced her to a few others who would be joining the flight. Assistants, business partners, people who carried themselves with quiet confidence. They welcomed her politely, though with a hint of curiosity. She was clearly not from their usual circle. When they boarded the plane, Elena felt as though she had stepped into a dream. The cabin was spacious and filled with soft leather seats arranged like a lounge. There were no cramped rows, no noisy passengers, only calm luxury. A flight attendant offered her a drink, and she accepted water, holding the glass carefully in her hands. She did not want to appear clumsy. As the plane lifted smoothly into the sky, Elena's nerves settled slightly. She watched the ground fall away beneath her and thought of her family back home. If they could see her now, sitting in a private aircraft among wealthy business leaders, they would hardly believe it. Even she struggled to believe it. During the flight, the man explained more about the meeting ahead. His company was negotiating an important partnership with Russian clients, and while he had translators available, he wanted someone he could trust personally. He explained that translation was not just about words, it was about tone, culture, and trust. When he heard Elena speaking to her brother at the restaurant, he sensed she carried not just fluency but also sincerity. That was why he wanted her there. Elena listened carefully, nodding as he spoke. She admitted her nerves, confessing that she had never done anything like this before. He reassured her calmly, "Just be yourself. Speak honestly. That is all I ask." His words gave her courage. When they arrived at their destination, Elena followed the group into a tall glass building. Everything around her was polished and grand, from the marble floors to the sweeping staircase. She tried not to stare, though inside she marveled at how far she felt from her small apartment and the noisy restaurant. In the meeting room, she sat quietly at first, observing. The Russian partners arrived and greetings were exchanged. Soon it was her turn to step forward. Her heart pounded as she began to translate, her voice steady but her palms damp with nerves. She listened carefully to each side, choosing her words with precision. She knew the weight of her task, not just to repeat words, but to bridge understanding between people from different worlds. To her relief, the Russian businessmen responded well. They nodded, their expressions softening as her translations carried not only accuracy but also respect. Elena found herself growing calmer with each sentence. The rhythm of language, something she had loved quietly for so long, now flowed naturally in the room. She realized that she belonged in that space, not because of her title but because of her skill. Hours passed, but she hardly noticed. The meeting ended with handshakes and smiles, a clear sense of progress. The man turned to Elena with genuine gratitude. "You did more than I hoped," he said softly. "You helped us find common ground." His words filled her with pride she had never known at the restaurant. After the meeting, the group returned to the aircraft. Elena sat quietly, replaying the day in her mind. She felt both exhausted and exhilarated. She had stepped into a world she thought was beyond her reach, and she had not only managed but succeeded. The man noticed her quietness and asked gently if she was all right. She nodded, her voice soft but steady. "I never imagined this. I'm grateful," he smiled in return. "This is only the beginning." Those words echoed in her mind all the way back to the city. She did not know exactly what they meant, but she felt them deeply. Something inside her had shifted. She was no longer just a waitress dreaming by her window. She was someone whose talents had been seen, acknowledged, and given space to grow. When the car dropped her back at her apartment, the city looked the same as always, yet everything felt different. She climbed the stairs to her small home, still the same worn place with creaking pipes and thin walls, but she carried herself differently now. She had touched another world and discovered that she could belong there. That night, as she sat by the window with a cup of tea, Elena thought about the future. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew it had already begun, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself not just to dream, but to believe. The next morning, Elena woke up feeling different. The world outside her window looked the same, the street still busy with cars and people rushing to work. But something inside her had shifted. The memory of yesterday's meeting stayed with her, as clear as if it had just happened. She could still hear the voices of the businessmen, still see the nods of approval when she spoke, still feel the sense of pride when the man thanked her for her help. It was as if a door had opened and now she stood at the edge of a new path. She went about her morning as usual, making tea, eating a piece of bread, straightening her small apartment. But everything felt lighter. Even the creak of the floorboards seemed less heavy. She knew her life had not changed completely yet. She was still the same Elena, still with bills to pay and shifts at the restaurant ahead. Yet deep in her heart she knew she was no longer only a waitress. She had shown herself and others what she could do. Her phone buzzed just as she was about to leave for work. When she saw the number, her heart skipped. It was from the same office she had visited before. She answered quickly, trying to sound calm. The voice on the other end was polite and clear. The man wanted to see her again. He had been impressed with her work and wanted her to help on more projects. Could she come to the office later that week? Elena felt her knees weaken slightly as relief and joy rushed through her. She agreed at once, her voice soft but steady. After she hung up, she sat quietly for a moment, letting the reality sink in. This was not a dream. He truly meant what he had said. This was only the beginning. At the restaurant that day, she moved with the same quiet grace, carrying trays and taking orders. But her heart was somewhere else. She smiled more easily, her steps felt lighter, and even the long hours didn't weigh on her as much. Her co-workers noticed the change, though she didn't explain. This was her private happiness, something too precious to put into casual words. The following week, Elena found herself sitting once again in the same tall glass building. This time she felt less nervous. The man welcomed her with the same calm warmth and introduced her to more people from his company. They spoke with her about upcoming work, about the importance of language and trust in business. Elena listened carefully, answering when needed, and each time she spoke, she grew more confident. She realized that her life was no longer tied only to the restaurant. She had been invited into another world, one where her skills had real value. Her tasks began simply. She attended meetings, listened, and translated when needed, but soon her role grew. She was asked to review documents, to prepare notes, to guide conversations where cultural understanding mattered. Each time she rose to the challenge. Her long hours of study, the nights spent whispering foreign words to herself, all came alive in this new work, and with each step her confidence grew. There were difficult moments too, times when the pressure felt heavy, when she worried she might fail. But each time she reminded herself of her journey, how she had come to this city with little more than hope, how she had worked long shifts to support her family, how she had dreamed quietly by her window. If she could endure those struggles, she could endure these challenges too. The man remained supportive, always patient, always respectful. He guided her when needed, but also gave her space to grow. He seemed to believe in her even when she doubted herself. That belief gave her courage. She began to see herself differently, not as a girl struggling to make ends meet, but as someone who had something rare to offer. Weeks turned into months, and Elena's life transformed. She still worked at the restaurant at times, but less and less. Her new role took her places she had never imagined. She traveled to other cities, sat in rooms with people of influence, and spoke words that carried weight. Each time she translated, she felt the same quiet pride, that her voice, once hidden, now had power to bridge worlds. She also never forgot her family. With her new income, she was able to send more support home. Her brother's voice on the phone grew lighter as his worries lessened. Her parents, once anxious for her, now spoke with pride. She told them little of the luxury planes or the tall glass buildings, but she shared enough for them to know she was safe and happy. That was what mattered most. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Elena sat once again by her window with a cup of tea. The city lights shimmered below, just as they always had. But this time she didn't feel like an outsider looking in. She felt part of it, part of something bigger. She thought of the path that had brought her here. The long shifts, the tired feet, the quiet dreams. All of it had led to this. She smiled to herself, remembering the moment when her brother had called at the restaurant, the moment she had answered in Russian without thinking. That single act, so ordinary to her, had been the spark. It reminded her how life could change in the smallest moments, how opportunities could appear when least expected. One phone call had opened a door, and she had been brave enough to walk through it. Elena knew her journey was only beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt, more hard work. But now she believed in herself in a way she never had before. She had seen what was possible, and she was ready to keep moving forward. As she sat there sipping her tea, she whispered softly to herself, a promise for the future. I will not stop now. I will keep going. The city stretched before her, wide and bright, full of possibilities, and Elena, once a quiet waitress balancing trays, now stood ready to embrace them all. The months rolled by faster than Elena had expected. Each day brought something new, and each challenge reminded her that life had truly changed. But while she had grown used to meetings, long discussions, and the quiet weight of responsibility, she had not lost the part of herself that once stood behind a counter with a notepad in her hand. She still remembered every step of her journey, and it gave her strength to face what came next. One morning she was invited to travel again, this time farther than before. She would join the team on a trip to a country she had only seen in photographs. The idea both thrilled and scared her. She packed carefully, choosing simple clothes, unsure of how others would see her. She was not someone who chased luxury or fashion, but she wanted to look presentable. As she closed her small suitcase, she thought of the girl she once was, folding her waitress uniform each night after work. The contrast made her smile quietly. At the airport, she saw the same private aircraft waiting. The polished metal gleamed under the sun, and for a moment she felt that same nervous excitement she had felt the very first time. But now there was also calmness. She was no longer a guest who had stumbled into an unfamiliar world. She was part of it. As she stepped inside, she greeted the faces she now knew well. They welcomed her warmly, no longer surprised by her presence. She belonged there. The journey itself was smooth, but Elena spent most of it preparing. She read through notes, practiced phrases, and studied the details of the meeting ahead. She had learned that success was not only about speaking well in the moment, but also about the effort put in beforehand. That lesson had carried her far, and she was determined never to forget it. When they landed, the city welcomed them with bright lights and unfamiliar sounds. Elena followed the group, observing carefully. Every detail fascinated her. The signs in another language, the rhythm of the streets, the way people moved with purpose. It reminded her of her own arrival in the city where she now lived. Back then, she had felt like an outsider, but now she walked with confidence. It was a quiet victory she held close to her heart. The meeting took place the next day in a tall building filled with glass and light. The air inside was serious, every face focused. Elena sat near the man she worked for, ready with her notebook. As the discussions began, she translated, her voice steady and clear. The words flowed easily, shaped by years of learning and by her deep respect for both sides. Each sentence felt like a bridge being built, connecting people who would not otherwise understand one another. The hours passed quickly, and when it was over, Elena felt both exhausted and proud. The man turned to her with a small nod, the kind of gesture that carried more weight than words. Others around the table also gave her quiet smiles of acknowledgement. It was not loud applause or grand praise, but it was enough. She had earned their respect. Later that evening, she returned to her hotel room, opened the window and let the cool air brush against her face. She looked out at the city, alive with lights, and thought about her own place in it all. She had traveled far, not only across countries but also within herself. The timid waitress who once worried about paying rent had grown into someone trusted with important work. The thought humbled her, but it also filled her with determination. In the days that followed, Elena's role continued to expand. She was asked to attend more sessions, to give her opinion on cultural matters, even to suggest better ways of presenting ideas. At first, she hesitated, unsure if her thoughts were truly needed, but each time she spoke, she realized people were listening. That realization gave her courage to continue. Despite the new responsibilities, she never lost her kindness. She greeted everyone, from the doorman of the hotel to the assistants who arranged schedules, with the same respect she had once given her customers at the restaurant. Perhaps it was this humility that made people admire her even more. She was never demanding, never boastful. She simply did her work with care and sincerity. One afternoon, after a long meeting, one of the executives approached her quietly. He told her how valuable her presence had been, how her calm way of translating had eased tense discussions. Elena thanked him, her cheeks warming at the compliment. She had never chased recognition, but hearing those words reminded her why she worked so hard, to make a difference, even in small ways. When the trip came to an end, Elena boarded the aircraft once again, this time with a heart full of gratitude. She had gained more than just experience, she had gained belief in herself. The flight home felt like a quiet reflection, a pause before the next chapter. She closed her eyes, letting the soft hum of the plane carry her into thought. Back in her own city, life resumed. The restaurant still stood at the corner where she had spent so many nights, and sometimes she passed by it on her way home. She would glance through the window, watching the waiters move quickly between tables. A part of her still belonged there in the rhythm of that simple life. But she also knew she could not return fully to it. She had stepped into something larger, and there was no going back. Her days grew busier, filled with work and travel, but she never let herself forget where she came from. She visited her old neighborhood, spoke kindly to the shopkeepers who remembered her, and helped whenever she could. She wanted to carry her success not as a weight above others, but as a light that could guide those still struggling. At night, when she sat by her window, Elena often thought about the journey ahead. There were still many unknowns, many challenges waiting, but instead of fear, she felt excitement. Life had shown her that opportunities could appear at the most unexpected moments, and she had learned to be ready when they did. One evening, her phone buzzed with another call. It was an invitation to an even larger project, one that would take her across continents. She held the phone in her hand for a long time, her heart racing. This was more than she had ever dreamed. But instead of doubt, she felt calm resolve. She knew now that she belonged on this path. She whispered softly to herself the same words she had once promised. I will keep going. And with that, Elena smiled, ready to face whatever came next.